All right. Well, good morning, everyone. So, one of the highest leverage things that we can do to level up in life, to achieve our goals, to live fully, and to defend freedom on solid ground is keep our mind connected to reality. Now, this is so simple to say, right? Just keep your mind connected to the facts. But it turns out it's really difficult to do. It's really difficult to do. And so I want to talk today about the process of doing that, of keeping your mind connected to reality. And we'll want to talk about the value of it, and then we're going to talk about the process. So what is the value of keeping your mind connected to the facts, knowing what's actually the case, knowing what's true in reality? Well, the value is that that's where we live. We live in reality. And if we want to achieve our goals in reality, whether they're career goals or relationship goals or political goals, right? For everything from, management to love to freedom to self-esteem, it doesn't matter what you want. That thing is here in this world, in this reality. And we need to keep our mind connected to that reality in order for it to be efficacious here where we live. That's the value of this. That's the value of keeping your mind connected to reality. Now, in a sense, this is so obvious that it shouldn't need to be stated. This is why parents tell their kids, hey, when you're crossing a street, look both ways. Reality really is what it is. And if you don't see and understand that fact, it can cause you lots of problems. On the other hand, when you do understand that, you can succeed wildly in reality. So there's this sense in which this is so obvious that it doesn't need to be stated. But the thing is that this process, which I will now call objectivity, the process of keeping your mind connected to reality, is very difficult for human beings because we are so complex and there's so much going on both in our minds and in the world. And there's also a lot going on in the history of thinking about what objectivity is. So I want to talk briefly about what objectivity is and what it isn't, and get some of that on the table. So now objectivity is about keeping your mind connected to facts, right? Everything from whether the car is coming to what are the best management techniques to what are the facts about romance that will make my romantic relationship work, and everything in between. So facts as against what? As against feelings? No. A lot of people think that objectivity, or they mischaracterize or misconceive objectivity as meaning just facts, no emotions or no feelings. But that's a really wrong view of objectivity because, just put it this way, are your emotions, are your feelings facts? If you feel fear or love, is it a fact that you feel that? Well, yes. So feelings are simply a kind of fact. Objectivity is about bearing in mind all the facts that are relevant to your life. Feelings, emotions, passions, aims, goals, purposes, all of these things are facts. So objectivity is not about pushing any of that aside. That would be a misunderstanding of this process or this virtue. When we want to keep our minds connected to reality, we need that whole suite of facts because we are super complex beings. We not only have this faculty of reason, which we'll talk more about, we have a faculty of emotion that's extremely important. If we didn't experience joy and love and the various emotions that make life rich and worth living, we wouldn't care to live. Life just wouldn't be worth living. So you don't want to segregate that aspect of human life and push it out of objectivity. That's the first misconception that I want to get out of the way. Objectivity absolutely includes that whole aspect of human life, your emotions, your passions, your aims. The other big, and there are plenty more, but I just want to mention two, the other big confusion in a lot of people's minds about objectivity stems from the way that objectivity and subjectivity have been discussed and conceived historically among philosophers. The idea of subjectivity is if it's just in the mind, right? Subjective means it's just in the mind, it's made up. And there's a whole series of philosophers who have held that there is no real reality, that everything that we experience in this world is simply made up by the human mind. This is Immanuel Kant's entire philosophy, is this idea that the collective consciousness of man creates the reality that we actually experience. He calls this the phenomenal world, as against a noumenal world which we don't have access to. That's the real world, but we can't get there because our senses process information, and therefore we don't actually have access to it. It gets kind of complex. But the point is that there's this idea that reality is just whatever we make up in our mind, and that's called subjectivity. And then there's the idea that's supposed to oppose that, which is the idea that reality is objective, or objectivity. And this is very frequently thought of as truth and goodness are out there somewhere. They're not in here, that's subjective, they're out there. And for this, you have in history of philosophy examples such as Plato's world of forms, right, where the true and the good are up in a world of forms, and what we experience down here are just shadows or vague resemblances of those real realities up there, and we don't really have access to those. Or the Christian version of this, which is that truth and goodness come from the will of God, and that's out there, right? And how do we get hold of that at all? Well, through revelations or faith. It just kind of comes in, and then we know. And this, by the way, for Plato's world of forms is similar too for the philosopher kings. They, if they studied enough mathematics, they then just know the form of the good and the true, and then they can tell us all what to do. So that's the idea that the true and the good is out there, and subjectivity is the idea that the true and the good are in here. Ayn Rand comes along and looks at this sort of conception of objectivity and subjectivity, and she says there's something missing here. This is not capturing the full picture of what we actually experience. And she says this is a false dichotomy, the idea that the true and the good are either in here or they're out there. She says, no, truth and goodness are a relationship of the in here. Yes, there's a subject, there's a mind, there's a consciousness, that's a thing. Truth and goodness are a relationship between that and things out in the world. So there's consciousness and there's existence. There's the mind and there's matter. There's psychology and there's, the physical world, right? And that the business of the mind, properly understood, is to capture, recognize, grasp what is the case. And that relationship, she says, that's what deserves the term objectivity. So she comes up with a third term, intrinsicism. And this is the idea that truth and goodness are just out there. She says objectivity doesn't deserve, or that version of objectivity doesn't deserve the term objectivity. That's just confusing because it makes it sound like these two things are separated, the in here and the out here can never come together. And she says, but that's not the way that it works. As we can see, it's not the way that it works. So she comes up with what can be called a trichotomy. There are three alternative ways to look at things. It's all either in the mind, that's subjectivism. It's all out there, either in, Plato's world of forms or in God's will or something like that. And that's intrinsicism. That's the idea that the true and the good are intrinsic out there in reality. And then there's the proper conception of objectivity, which is the mind's relationship to the facts. And this is the business of keeping our minds connected to reality. So you can see why that's an important distinction. If you thought that it was all in here or all out there and never the twain shall meet, you couldn't understand really what's going on in our human condition, and you really wouldn't be able to understand what knowledge is. So I want to talk about objectivity in this conception, keeping your mind connected to reality, and we're gonna zero in on a question that helps us to do that, to keep our minds connected to reality. Before we get there, I want to just talk a little bit about what reason is and how reason works. So reason is this faculty that we have uniquely, as far as we know, human beings have, and it's this faculty that enables us to not only perceive the world with our senses, other animals can do that too, but also to take those perceptions and integrate them into concepts. Words, the things I'm using now and that you use all the time, right? These are concepts. And then put those together into propositions and generalizations and principles. And this is why we can do the freakishly weird things that we do as human beings. Putting satellites up in the sky, curing cancer, creating constitutions, and, all of this stuff happens. Why? Because we have this wild capacity to integrate perceptions into concepts and then to think using those concepts. That's what makes us human. These thoughts that we have are abstractions. They're like, take justice or love. Can I go touch justice or love? Can I see it? No, it's not that. Those things exist, but they exist in the mind. They're not perceptual. And most of the thinking that we do is dealing with things that are not perceptual. So there's this difference between these abstractions that we use and perceptual reality. You hear that noise, that's perceptual reality. You see a hummingbird, that's perceptual reality. Conceiving that bird as a bird, that's an abstraction. And then as a type of bird, as against an eagle or a falcon, those are more abstractions, right? That's what we can do. So the business of objectivity is somehow to keep these abstractions that we use all the time connected to reality. Ayn Rand, in her book, Introduction to Objectivist Epistemology, made massive headway in understanding how the human mind does this. That book is all about how it is that we form concepts. Concepts meaning, in this case, basically just what the ideas are that our single words represent. Everything from the word represent to sarcasm to justice. These are just concepts. And her question is, how do we know what these concepts refer to? How do we know what they mean? People are debating all the time about the meaning of words, right? You hear this, you just turn on the news and there's a disagreement about what racism is, about what tariffs are, about whether tariffs are good, et cetera, right? So there's no mass agreement about many, many terms. But according to Rand, and in this book, I think she very beautifully demonstrates, there is an objective way of determining what ideas mean and what they don't. And one of the questions that she brings to bear here is this question. And this is the objectivity in one question that we're going to be talking about here. That question is, what facts of reality give rise to the need for this abstraction, whatever the abstraction is? So, what facts of reality give rise to the need for love, or honesty, or justice, or take any abstraction? And think about the magic of this question, and we're going to get into some examples with it. Either there are facts of reality that give rise to the need of a concept, in which case those facts are the very facts that make it grounded in reality, because those are what it refers to. They're the things that it refers to. Or there are no facts that give rise to the need of a concept. Like, it's the triddle. What does that refer to? It doesn't refer to anything. It's just a noise. So if I were to say that's a concept, and you say, well, what does it refer to? And I couldn't point to what it refers to. You just say, well, it's just a noise. It's not really a concept. So this question, what facts of reality give rise to the need of this concept, is kind of a magical question in a sense. Magical not in the literal sense, but in the powerful sense here. So just call it a powerful question. It can help keep our minds connected to reality. Rand gives the example of justice in her book that I mentioned earlier, Introduction to Objectivist Epistemology. And she just says, what facts of reality give rise to the concept of justice? And as soon as you ask that question, look what your mind does. It starts looking for the facts that give rise to it. In other words, it has this vertical element to the question. It's telling you to go down to the ground, go to reality to look for the evidence that gives rise to, or the facts that give rise to the need of this thing. And as she starts to unpack and answer this question, she does it in roughly this kind of pattern. So what facts give rise to the need of justice? Well, we look out at reality, we see we deal with people. Perceptual fact that we deal with people all the time. And people are different than other objects. People are different than inanimate objects. When we're judging people, it's different than if we're judging a car or a computer or, a door jam or whatever, whatever the various things that you might have to judge in your work and daily life. People are different. What is it that's different about them? Well, they have consciousness, A, and B, really importantly, they have free will. People have free will. You don't know what they're going to do because they can choose to do one thing or the other. You know what your computer's going to do if it's programmed properly, and if it fails, you know that something went wrong in there, we can go figure it out. It's just mechanical. Human beings are not just mechanical, so we need to judge human beings in light of the fact that they have this thing called free will. And then she asks, well, isn't this sort of just another version of objectivity, or just saying judge the facts? And she says, yes, it is. It's a subset of objectivity. Justice, judging people by the facts, is a subset of objectivity. Meaning we're going to try to figure out what's true, what's the case, what's factual about this person or that person. Then she says, well, what can make our judgment go wrong? Is it the case that our judgments are automatically right? Has anybody misjudged someone before, right? They're not automatically right? We can be wrong in these judgments, and being wrong in your judgments about people can be really devastating, right? You can elect horrible leaders, everything from Hitler, who was literally elected, to Donald Trump, and if it had been Kamala, equally bad Kamala. So take it either way there. If you judge people poorly, whether individually or as a country, you get yourself into really hot water. So one thing that we can go wrong on is we can judge people incorrectly, and we can do that either because we don't have sufficient evidence about them, or because we ignore evidence about them, or because we judge them on the basis of something other than the relevant evidence, right? So on a personal level, it could be, well, I didn't know this guy was dishonest or a liar before I hired him. So that's not having sufficient evidence. Or it could be, well, I know he lied to Mary, but he won't lie to me. That would be ignoring evidence, right? Or it could be judging him on some other basis. Hey, he's a nice guy. I don't know what else is going on here, but we'll just hire him anyway, right? So those are the three categories where you can go wrong. And so Rand continues, this is all sort of the way that she's unpacking justice and saying, what is this thing and why do we need it? And she then says, well, is there a science involved in judging people in virtue of the fact that they have free will? And she says, yes, that science is ethics. And justice is just a category within that science. And in order to judge people correctly, you need an objective standard for judging them, an objective criterion. What is that? Ultimately, it's the factual requirements of human life. We judge people as good when they uphold the requirements of human life, thinking, producing, trading, and we judge them as bad when they violate those requirements, right? Stealing, robbing, raping, pillaging, etc. So there you have, in one example, the answer to the question, what facts of reality give rise to the need of this thing, say justice? So in pattern, I want to look at several instances of how you can use this question to keep your thinking tied to reality. And look, not every time we want to keep our thinking tied to reality are we dealing with, huge philosophical abstractions like justice. Sometimes it's just, what facts of reality give rise to my need to wake up at 4 a.m. tomorrow? Is there something big I've got to do? Is there some project I've got to do? Do I need to work out in the morning? Whatever the case may be. It doesn't have to be some massive, philosophical conundrum that you're wrestling with. This question is applicable literally to every aspect of your life. Because either there are facts that give rise to your need to do something, and those facts, by the way, and this is why I brought up emotions and feelings and aims earlier, those facts include your aims. If I need to get up early in the morning because I want to get a report done before I go to work so that I can, really excel in the work that I'm doing, that's an aim. It's something I want. So those are facts that I have those aims and those desires. That don't ignore those as, those aren't facts. They are facts. Those are really important facts about my life. In fact, the most important facts about your life are precisely your values, the things you're after, the things you want. So when you're asking this question, what facts of reality give rise to my need to do X, it could be, what facts of reality give rise to my need to ask this girl out? Right? It doesn't have to be, why is there something rather than nothing, or what's the purpose of life? It doesn't have to, it could be more important than those stupid questions. It could be a question about what really matters to your life. Why do I need to ask this girl out? Because I'm not going to see her after tonight if I don't do it now. What facts of reality give rise to the need for me to adjust my food intake so that I can keep myself fit or to exercise regularly? The facts are that I want to be able to do these activities. I want to be able to ski. I want to be able to rock climb or dance or whatever it is I like to do. Those are facts, those aims. So an interesting thing here is you see the relationship all of a sudden between facts and values. The is-ought gap, the alleged fact-value gap. You can't, values and facts have nothing to do with each other and there's no way to pull them together. We're not even making the effort to do that here, but just in thinking this way about facts and values and facts and needs, you see we're bridging it right there. There are facts that give rise to all sorts of things that we need in life. And those facts, and really getting your head around those facts, is the key to living successfully. It's the key to setting goals, achieving goals, keeping yourself motivated to do things. It's the key to understanding what rights are, how to protect them, how to communicate these things to other people. So this question, what facts of reality give rise to the need for X, is a really, really powerful question. It's really powerful. And the X here can stand for many things. That variable can be objects, it can be actions, it can be virtues, processes, it can be institutions, governments. What facts of reality give rise to the need for a government? Maybe we don't need a government. Maybe we do need a government. There's lots of debates on that. Are there facts that give rise to the need of a government or not? That's the only way you can figure out the answer to that question, is say, what are the facts that give rise to the need for it? What are the facts that give rise to the need for tariffs? Do we really need tariffs? If we do, there should be facts that support the idea that we need these things. And so think about this question in your daily life and start to bring it to bear on the various things that matter to you. Now, there are different versions of this question, and I want to point out, first of all, I've already mentioned this question, at least the genesis of it for me. I'd never heard anyone else ask this kind of question before I read this in Ayn Rand's book, in the one I mentioned. But then I started to realize that it's not only in that book that she asks this question. She asks this question in one form or another all over the place. And there are other thinkers who do too. Plenty of other thinkers ask these kinds of questions. I don't think that they all realize that they're asking some version of the question, what facts of reality give rise to the need for X? But anytime you hear a question such as, and I'll name some more of Rand's here, what is morality? Do we need it? And if so, why? Right? This is how she begins her quest into figuring out whether there's an objective morality and what facts of reality give rise to objectivity and morality, right? What is morality? Do we need it? If so, why? The if so, why means what facts of reality give rise to the need of this thing? What are values? Do we need them? If so, why? That was her next step in that same quest. Either we need values or we don't. If we do, then the facts of reality that give rise to our need of values are going to be precisely the facts that tie those things to reality, that make them objective. She asks in other places, in one of her essays, she says, if a theory is not applicable to reality, she's talking about when people say, well, it's good in theory, but not in practice. And she says, well, if a theory is not applicable to reality, by what standard could you possibly call it good? What does good mean? What stands under the idea of a theory being good? It has to be connected to reality so that it works in reality. That's what it would mean for a theory to be good. You can't say, well, it's a good theory, but it doesn't work in practice. Good theories are drawn from reality so that they work in reality. That's the connection, you see? So there's just so much power in this. Another instance in Rand, she says, she's talking in this, I won't give the character's name away for anyone who hasn't read Atlas Shrugged yet, but there's a speech in Atlas Shrugged where one of the characters says, you've heard that money is the root of all evil. Have you ever asked yourself, what is the root of money? And then this character gets into talking about what money is. You know, it's not just a medium of exchange, it's a store of value. It enables you to save so that you can, you know, postpone and spend later and all the values that money has. And then he's talking about, well, where does it come from? Is money just valuable in and of itself? No, it represents something. What does it represent? Production. It represents production. So what the root of money is production. The root of production is thought, rational thought, looking at reality and figuring out, hey, how can we take these resources and convert them into something that we can use in order to live? That's another instance of this question. What is the root of production? Of money. What facts of reality give rise to the need of the concept of money or the need of the thing called money? So I want to take a few more versions of this. How much time do I have left, by the way? 20, good. I'm going to take a few more versions of this, and then during the Q&A, if you guys have, I'll take any questions that you have, but if you have any particular ideas that you want to put to the test on this, we can do that then. So we'll start really easy. We just go, what facts give rise to the need for food, clothing, and shelter? Pretty straightforward. If you don't get these things, you'll die. All right, so bam. But I want to start there because all of these things, in a sense, are a matter of life or death. Either we need these things in order to live, and by live, I don't mean just stay alive. I mean live fully as human beings. Or we don't need them, in which case we don't need them, and let's stop talking about them and do something else. What facts of reality give rise to the need for fun? Do you need to have fun in life? Yeah, if you have life with no fun ever, you would not want to live. Try just going a day or a week without fun and see what happens. You will not be a happy camper. We need fun. We're a kind of being that needs that thing. We could go on to all sorts of things about art and enrichment in that, but we'll move on to something else. What facts of reality give rise to the need for independence? And I don't mean independence as a country, I mean as a person. And what is independence? So independence is this, I will do my own thinking and determine what I think is true and what I think is valuable and good, and I'll act accordingly. As against what? As against turning to the crowd. What do they think I should believe and say and do? So that's what we call second-handedness, right? You're putting other people before your own judgment of the truth. So do we need, A, to be independent in order to live a beautiful life? Well, yes. If you just follow the crowd, you have no, you're not even you have no agency. You literally give up your agency. You give up your what it means to be a human being. And so we need not only independence, but we also need the concept of independence, and we need the alternative concept of second-handedness so that we know what that bad thing is that we don't want to do. Not only do we not want to do that ourselves, we don't want to be around people who do that. So do we need second-handedness as a thing? No, but we need the concept of second-handedness. So it's worth knowing that there's a relationship here, that you can have a thing that's bad, but the concept is still necessary. Do we need racism? The thing. Do we need that? Do we need to judge people on the basis of the shape of their eyes or the color of their skin or the like? No, it's of no value to us as human beings whatsoever. Do we need the concept of racism? Well, yes, because some people do that thing and we need to be able to name it, right? So you can see, I'm just giving you like a smattering of the ways in which you can put this question to work. And the beauty of the question is that it genuinely keeps your mind connected to reality. Whether you're trying to keep your mind connected to historical facts, we heard Johann Norberg last night give a wonderful lecture about the Golden Ages, right? And there are facts in the history of the world that we can learn from. And if you connect your mind to those facts and actually bear them in mind as you move forward, particularly if more than just one person does it, if a whole society does it, then your society can move forward beautifully. Oh, well, look, we can learn from what these people have done in the past by looking at the facts and incorporating those into the way that we're going to use abstractions moving forward. Or you can ignore that stuff or not know about it, and then you get what you get from that. And I'm from America. We're living through a hell right now that is exactly that kind of thing. So think about this question, put it to work. It's like I said at the beginning, it's the simplest thing in the world to say, keep your mind connected to reality. Doing that thing is a whole nother ballgame. It's really not easy. It takes a lot of work. And this question aims your mind in the right direction, no matter what the case is, no matter what it is that you're thinking about. You want your romantic relationship to be good. You want to have a romantic relationship and you don't have one yet. Oh, what are the facts about romance? If you're a young man and you don't have a romantic partner, you need to know what is involved in gaining a romantic partner. If you're heterosexual, you want to know, you want to find out, what is it that women really care about and take seriously? Now, you don't want to convert yourself into what other people want, but you want to make the best version of yourself in view of the fact that if you want a relationship, you have to be a certain way. Hygiene matters, manners matter. Learning things that make you more fun, learning to dance, learning to have a conversation in a way that's appealing. All of these things matter. And all of these things are facts that give rise to successful romance, right? So again, just think about this question, think about the various versions of the question, and I think you will find that if you ask this question regularly, and if you answer it regularly, and if you then act on the answers that you come up with, you got to put it to action. It's we're not just minds in the ether here. You've got to put your answers to these questions to action. But if you do, that's the virtue of objectivity. And it's really probably the most powerful virtue of all. If you do this and do it successfully and regularly, you will thrive. So that's it, and we have time for questions. We have 15 minutes for questions. I'm going to take 10 minutes of questions, and then I want the final 5 to say a few more words. So if you have questions, go ahead and get a mic.
Just thank you for the great talk, Craig. I have one quick question. We all know that the knowledge is something like open-ended journey. and how we can we be certain that a definition is complete and full? What happens when we acquire, for example, new knowledge for something? This does change the definition of a concept, and yeah.
Yeah, great question. So how can you be certain that you've got the right definition of something? Definitions are difficult because definitions are really the final step in the process of concept formation. So the earlier steps in concept formation consists mostly in asking questions like, what is this thing? How does it relate to other things? What differentiates it from other things? Do we need to make any kind of a concept for this? We can work with justice because it's already on the table. We see that we need to judge people. We don't have a definition of justice right off the bat. They don't come from on high, right? We've got to develop them. But they get developed by observing and integrating based on our needs. So we take justice. We need to judge people, clearly. Got to do that. We need to judge them in light of the fact that they have volition. We need to judge them on the basis of facts, not just, what we feel or what we wish or what we hope or on some other non-relevant factor. So we've got to judge them on the basis of facts. And then once we judge them, we need to treat them accordingly. If you judge somebody as evil but treat him as good, it's going to mess your life up. If you judge someone as good but treat him poorly, that's going to mess your life up. So you need to judge people correctly and then treat them accordingly. And then after you do the work to figure out what are the facts that give rise to the need of justice, then you can say, okay, now how do we essentialize that thought process? Then you can come up with a definition of justice, which would be something like, justice is the virtue of judging people according to the facts and treating them accordingly as they deserve to be treated, or something to that effect. And that's where the definition comes from. Now, definitions are contextual, and you frequently have to form definitions at a certain point so that you can use the idea and know what you're thinking or talking about before you have complete information on something. So definitions can change over time, and they often do, as your thinking becomes more refined. So you don't need the Platonic form of the proper definition in order to think and use ideas. Just because it's also on the table, take the concept of tariff, right? So you can read about tariffs in a book on economics where you can get some, very high level understandings of the history of this method of government taking money in the form of essentially taxation through imports, and it's an indirect tax on the citizens and all of that. Or if you're trying to explain this to a group of high school students or something, you can make it a lot easier and say, look, if you've got a lemonade stand and you want to sell your lemonade to this person over here, but I come in as the government and I say, well, you can't move your lemonade this way unless you give me some money, and then what's going to happen to the price of lemonade if it goes into a secondary market? Like, you can put it in simpler terms, right? So then the way in which I might define tariffs in that context would be context dependent. It would be what's going to work for this group of students versus maybe what will work for a high-level group of economics, college students. So don't get hung up on every definition being some flawlessly perfect definitions. Definitions serve a purpose. They enable us to try to differentiate this thing from that thing by the essentials as far as we know them.
Any other question?
Thanks a lot. Concerning the question in general, I was a bit puzzled by, there might be, concepts where there's multiple ways it can be grounded. For example, let's say you talked about the truth and the good. The good, that might be grounded in very different ways depending on who you're speaking to, but even the same person over the course of their life might have very different ways of defining what is good and the facts that give need to the rise of it, so to speak. So how do you sort of resolve that conflict, because the good may even be in conflict with itself, so to speak, depending on your values or who you're speaking to or where you are in your life.
So good question. How do you know that something like, if you've got the concept of good, which a lot of people are going to disagree on the definition of, and how do you know whether you've observed the correct facts that give rise to this idea? And you even mentioned that, it might be that the good is in conflict with itself, like there's a contradiction in this conception or in someone's conception. Contradictions can exist, but only in the mind. That things are what they are out in reality, and if you ask the question, what facts of reality give rise to the need of the concept of good, what you'll find, and this is what Ayn Rand does in her essay, The Objectivist Ethics, what you'll find is that the reason we need the concept of good or value or any of these moral concepts is because there's something down here right at the ground that is an alternative that we face that gives rise to the need of ideas about what's good and bad, right and wrong for us as human beings. And that thing is the alternative of life or death, of remaining in existence or going out of existence. So if you're on the premise that either we're going to have reasons and underlying facts that connect an idea to reality in order to accept it as true and use it, or we're going to not use the concept or just say it's not a valid concept. So if that's your premise and that's my premise, then you would say, look, I'm only going to use this concept if I know how I can connect it to reality. And certainly if I find that I'm using it in a way that isn't connected to reality, and then someone shows me there's a way that it does connect to reality, I'm going to say, thank you for the correction, which is effectively what I said when I discovered Ayn Rand. I was like, she was dead already, but I was like, thank you for this. Now I know what this term actually means, right? Because I was brought up in a household where good meant sacrificially serving other people. But if you ask the question, what facts of reality give rise to the need to self-sacrificially serve other people, you will find that there are no facts of reality that give rise to the need of that. Not one. So it's not the case that you can have rational disagreements ultimately about whether or not good should mean giving up your values or pursuing values. I would say, and Rand's whole point is that no, the whole reason we need the concept of good or value or morality is to come up with life-serving values and life-serving actions and life-serving institutions, because life is what it is all about. That's what gives rise to it. It's what makes values possible and necessary. On the other hand, altruism, which we were all raised with, says the opposite. It says, no, life is not the standard. The standard is giving up. It's loss. This is why Jesus on the cross is regarded as a paragon of moral virtue. It's why Mother Teresa is regarded as a paragon of moral virtue. And it's why a profit-seeking businessman is regarded at best as neutral, but probably as evil for seeking profit. So you have to decide whether you're going to go with, I want things to connect to reality or not. And then I'll say one more thing on the concept of good. There's been a lot of wrestling in the history of philosophy about whether you can tie good to reality in any way at all, right? Hume's is-ought dichotomy, the idea that you can't derive oughts or values from facts, and G.E. Moore's so-called naturalistic fallacy, which is the idea that good can't be defined. It's just an intuitive thing that we know, and you either know it or you don't. And it is objective, according to Moore, but it's just a feeling, right? Well, that's not going to help us out. What if I feel like cutting your head off, right? And I feel like that's the good. That's just not going to work. We need to ask what facts give rise to the need of these concepts. And if we do, then we keep our concepts connected to reality. That's the means of doing it. So think about it more. Look, this is a short talk, and it's a big idea, and we covered a lot of examples in the whole suite of sort of areas of human concern. And I did that intentionally because I wanted to show you how applicable this is. But the key to using this idea is not to just go, okay, I got it now, I'm done. It's to put it to work. Take this question, What facts of reality give rise to the need for this thing, and put it to work. See what it does in your thinking. See what it does when you try to use it in your own thinking. See what it does when you bring it into conversations. Somebody's using a term. Somebody says, extremism is just the real problem in the United States. So what does extremism mean? What facts of reality give rise to the need of the concept of extremism? And what you'll find, as Ayn Rand points out in one of her essays about extremism, is that there are no facts that give rise to the need of that kind. Extremism means a lot of something is bad, because it's got a negative connotation, right? Extremism, bad thing. And then any extremes are bad. Well, what about extreme justice? What about extreme rationality? What about extreme beauty? What about all the extremes of good things? Like, the only thing that's bad in the extreme are things that are bad by their very nature, right? Extreme dishonesty, extreme terrorism, extreme violence, right? So if you put this to work, you'll find, I promise you that you will find, if you put this question to work, it will blow your mind repeatedly. And you'll start to see a power in this that you've never seen in any other question.
Okay, that was the last question. We have over time.
Yeah, I am going to take just a couple of minutes here to say a few words about how to think further about this and put this to work. First of all, I really encourage any of you who are interested in what you've heard here, do some reading on this. There are several articles that I could recommend. I'll try to keep it to just a few so that you maybe focus on the ones that can do the heaviest lifting. Read Ayn Rand's essay, Philosophical Detection, in her book, Philosophy Who Needs It. It's all about how you ask questions to get to the bottom of things and just being a philosophical detective, as the title suggests. Read The Objectivist Ethics if you've not read that. That's in that same book. And if you really want to get into the nuts and bolts of this, pick up a copy of her book, Introduction to Objectivist Epistemology. Ultimately, good thinking, powerful thinking, really understanding how to navigate the difficulties of life and the difficulties of social engagement and politics, you need to know what concepts are and where they come from and which ones are legitimate and how they're used legitimately and how they're used fallaciously. And that's the only book I know of that actually gets into this stuff. In all of the reading that you do with Rand, and I say this even more so for Rand than anyone else, I advocate reading the book in one hand and having a dagger in the other. Challenge her ideas. Don't let it go, oh, this just sounds good, I'll accept it. No, never. Especially not with someone who just seems to keep making sense. When someone seems to keep making sense, it should raise a little bit of suspicion as to whether you are being sucked into something that just, seems too good to be true. So I advocate when you read Rand that you really challenge every word that she is saying and don't accept any of it unless it makes sense to you. Some of it won't make sense when you first read it. It just won't. And you'll, especially in Introduction to Objectivist Epistemology, there's some sections in that book that you're first reading, there's no way you're going to get your head around. It doesn't matter. You can just say, fine, I didn't understand that. But you'll get much of it, and the parts that you get are going to be super valuable. But just challenge them as you read them. And then also, finally, if you're interested in these kinds of ideas, Objective Standard Institute, the organization that puts this conference on, we teach courses on this very kind of thing. We teach courses on thinking and principles. We do reading groups on this very book I'm talking about, Introduction to Objectivist Epistemology. We do listening groups on the history of philosophy. Thomas Walker is doing one of those right now. So if you're interested in learning more about these kinds of ideas and really learning them in a first-handed, grounded way where you really get the ideas rather than just having somebody sort of tell you, well, this is true and here's why you should accept it. Check out our website and check out our courses and get into them. I think you'll have a really great time in there. Enjoy the rest of the conference, and I'm here. If you guys have questions, just find me. All right.